message? Is this a protest? Political activism?
Well, I just like my ears to be circulated with air.
You get the hood on.
I won't think it. I'm just getting used to it.
Okay. Well, anyway, it's a new day. It's a new will do. He's evolving, which is what should happen. Change is the rule of the universe. Progression. Wonderful. You gotta love it. Also, just one more thing. You got a fancy Cybertruck on your desk.
Yeah.
Can you give a quick shout out? This is like 3D printed. It's really intense.
It's got lights and everything. Oh, it's a John Mantis.
That thing is so cool. Look at it. Representing now all the Cybertruck news that we do. Look how cool that was. It's intricate. The details, the brake light and the headlight actually functions. So shout out there. Very cool. New later viewer sent it. It's incredible. What a time. 3D printed Cybertrucks. There's no real Cybertruck. A lot of news to cover. I know we've been absent probably a little. We're going to be uploading daily this week. That's Monday. That's Tuesday. Wednesday. You know what? I can't shoot on Wednesday. I got supposed to see. That's Monday. That's Tuesday. That's Thursday. Anyhow, there's a lot of stuff that's been taking place, so we got to just stay up on it. And today we got a hot one. Apple.
They call us typical Americans. Maybe because we live typical American.
Idea that Trump is our anointed, God's anointed one, our anointed leader. They say the President of the United States attempted to use his political power to coerce a foreign leader and to harass and to discredit one of the President's political opponents. That is not only a violation of the Constitution, more importantly, it's profoundly immoral, they say. His Twitter feed alone, with his habitual string of mischaracterizations, lies, slanders, is a near perfect example of a human being who is morally lost and confused. I love it. Of course, there is a faction in Christianity that supports Trump, and they are still real big on that. They kind of address those folks. But I'm going to switch to the end here and say that I'm going to read the last paragraph, which is pretty powerful. We have reserved judgment on Mr. Trump for years now. Some have criticized our reserve. But when it comes to condemning the behavior of another, patient charity must come first. So we have done our best to give evangelical Trump supporters their due, to try to understand their point of view, to see his prudential nature of so many political decisions that they've made regarding Mr. Trump. To use an old cliche, it's time to call a spade a spade. To say that no matter how many hands we win in this political poker game, we are playing in the stacked deck of gross immorality and ethical incompetence. And just when we think it's time to push all our chips in the center of the table, that's when the whole game will come crashing down. It will crash down on our reputation, on the reputation of evangelical religion and of the world's understanding of the gospel, and it will come crashing down on a nation of men and women whose welfare is also our concern. So
that's Christianity Today publishing an article on how their view is that Trump should be impeached and removed from office.
The interesting thing for me through the course of all this is not so much that people are taking sides. People are always going to take sides. And it's about who and what takes what side for what reason, and when do they change, or do they change at all?
That's right. That's right. So this riled up the evangelicals a bit, and Trump. And I've got two tweets from him that were pretty choice that I thought I'd read as a response. He said in a tweet, December 20th, the day afterwards, a far-left magazine, or very progressive, as some would call it, which has been doing very poorly and hasn't been involved with the Billy Graham family for many years, Christianity Today, knows nothing about reading a perfect transcript of a routine phone call and would rather have a radical left non-believer who wants to take your religion and your guns than Donald Trump as your president. What a long, complicated sentence. No president has done more for the evangelical community and is not even close. And it's not even close. You will not get anything from those Dems on stage. I won't be reading E.T. again. He means C.T.
Okay. I was like, Entertainment Tonight?
Yeah,
Something too?
Entertainment Tonight. So he's, little pissy there. But he went on to say...
Hang on, because that's a satire site.
Is it?
Yes.
Oh, my goodness. Then we'll stop.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm like looking at the heading going, he went on to say, I'm not convinced he went on to say.
I'll double check my facts and read another time. But he...
That's the thing, though. One for years on the show and on other shows, on Nonprofits and everything else, we talked about the fact that when it comes to various religious beliefs and what people, not all people, but what some people might say or think on behalf of a religious belief, it's impossible to parody, because the thing that you come up with that is supposed to be ridiculous, somebody out there believes.
Okay.
And I'm so frustrated by the gluck of internet satire sites and how often everybody just looks at it and like, okay, here, this is true. It was like, just say that, so there was a satiric site that site bought the satire site CNN. But except that CNN's not satire, so that was the joke they were making. In any case, setting all that aside,
kind of meta.
Yeah, it's frustrating to me because we were talking about this yesterday on the drive to Houston. Because I've got Android Auto in my car, and so the navigation will pop up on the thing, and I can just, ask questions. Like, I'm not going to say the key phrase that will kick off people's phones, because evidently I have a voice that's generic enough that if I were to say one of the names of one of the phones, it just respond, and I don't want to cut the show out. But we would ask questions. At one point it was like, which city has a larger population, and you can ask, how many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Roll Tootsie Pop? And it turns out there's an actual answer that some students came up with. You can have it tell you a joke. But if you ask it, and screw you, Google, for being cowards, if you ask it, do vaccines cause autism? Instead of going with the actual science, it just points you to a Wikipedia article on the controversy. And the same thing with the 9/11 truth stuff. Now, we live in a time where we have more access to more information than ever, and where we know far more. If you ask it whether or not the Earth's flat, it says no.
Okay.
So, good job, Google, for not being cowardly about everything.
What about lizard people?
Yeah. But one of the problems is that you can't be an expert on everything, including who to rely on. And it's unavoidable that we have to rely on stuff. It's like, oh, well, this scientist says, or this scientist says. And it's not about what a scientist says or what science says, because science isn't a thing. All we can do is talk about the current best models that we have and the evidence supporting them. And it's very difficult to figure out, I can't be an expert on every subject.
Right.
However, we also are seeing a resurgence of flat earthers and science denial and all that. And once upon a time, a satire site might have been interesting for me. And now they're just frustrating because they get passed around as if they're real news. Even when they clearly label themselves, satire site, or, people don't do that. As a matter of fact, most people don't read beyond the headline. It's like, oh, so-and-so said this, let me post it. And that's why, so Kobe Bryant died today in a helicopter accident, which at least that's what was being reported before I got on here. It started off as a live report, and then there were several other sites that were using that site as a source. And so some of my more skeptical friends were like, has anybody heard about this from a reputable source? Because this is what's being reported, and I don't necessarily want to trust it. And then CBS did a news article on it. And I, like probably most everybody else, went, okay, now it's real. But the truth is, I don't know what CBS's source was. CBS's source could have been TMZ for all I know. Now it's around enough that enough times passed that I would have expected, if this story weren't true, one of the reputable news sites would have said, no, this is hoax or whatever else. And so I would imagine that we're up against, memorials on SportsCenter right now, and debates over, and I don't know anything about basketball. I'm not even going to pretend to. I mean, there's a debate, Kobe or LeBron or whoever, put up your fights, but we have access to more information, but we also have access to more misinformation. And we need to all be understanding that every single one of us can and has been fooled. Every single one of us has believed something without good reason. There's no perfect thinker. And that you can't just go, oh my gosh, how can you possibly believe this when there's this piece of information, this and this and this and this. It's not up to me to educate everybody on everything I know or that they don't. It's just impractical. But maybe exercising a little bit of charitable thinking, a charitable listening, and an understanding that, yeah, we've all been duped by something at some point. And now we live in a time where you'd like to think it should happen less often, but it's actually happening more often. And fake news, the rallying cry of some people, the reason that is successful in getting people to disregard real news is because there is in fact so much fake news and we're all aware of it. And I think the biggest hurdle we face is recognizing just how often we've been misled and fooled. The problem is that there are people who take that and then they spin conspiracy theories out of it. Oh, you're being lied to about this, you're being lied to about this, and that means you're being lied to about this and this and this and this and this, and you can't trust science, you can't trust the news, and you can't trust anybody. And they're not entirely wrong, it's just the conclusions they make. It's really easy to take a whole bunch of disparate facts and weave together a compelling story. I mean, that's what a murder mystery is. The author knows who did it at the beginning, but their entire job in a mystery story is to give you information to lead you away from the right answer, to disguise it, so that when you get to the point where the detective is solving the mystery, it can feel like an aha moment to you. And then you think you solved the damn mystery, when really somebody's just spoon-feeding you misinformation until they give you the truth. John in Wisconsin, thanks for waiting.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hi, John. Good
All
morning.
right, so first off, I wanted to start off by saying I was turned on to your guys' show by one of my friends who recently went from being a Christian to an atheist. And he's a good friend of mine, and I enjoy talking with him intellectually. And
Good
I'm
morning,
more than
guys.
willing to share my
Trying to see if I
perspective,
can finish this
when
last little bit of
I see that I am
books right
completely
here.
out of place.
And this
I'm
little
not gonna lie,
portion
I'm
down
probably
here,
not gonna change my
and then the
entire
underpainting will be
perspective just based on this
complete.
one call-in or anything.
I wouldn't have expected that. I
Move on to another painting.
I would be very skeptical if I had a phone call with somebody and they dramatically changed their position in the course of, a 5, 10, 15-minute phone call. And I'll tell you this. I did a debate in Dallas, and when the debate was over, there was a guy who came up to me who said, I walked in here a serious evangelical Christian, and you convinced me, and I no longer believe that, and I'm on your side. Pulled him aside. I wanted to talk to him some more because I wanted to find out what it was that changed his mind. Because that process is not something that I think is likely to happen in the course of debate. And so my thinking is, if he changed his mind, maybe he'd been having doubts and had 25 conversations and this was the last one. But if he walked in as a serious, committed Christian and we had a simple, debate about whether or not you should believe in the resurrection or whatever, and he walks out an atheist, I'm not convinced that he's actually rational. He might be one of those people who just accepts the last thing he heard, like some presidents that I know of.
Yeah, no, I definitely appreciate that perspective.
But anyway, go ahead. What do you got for us?
So I got a lot of topics, but I don't think we're going to get to most of them. So first off, I definitely.
Well,
Let's do this. Let's do this, John. Let's try and keep it to one because there's 6 callers. And if it goes well, then we could just make this a regular thing where you call in with the other things on your laundry list.
Oh, absolutely. All right. So the main perspective I want to bring up is that being a Christian and also a physics major, I see a lot of issues where I want to try and equate science with God. And if I don't see a connection between the two, then it kind of makes me a little bit nervous. So I have personally found connections with all the major theories. Like people are like, oh God, there's a huge difference between creationism and evolution. And they're talking about all the, and I guess they refer to all the different things like Big Bang Theory, planetary and stellar evolution, organic evolution, macroevolution, all those things as evolutions. Well, I just see them as different major scientific theories. And I've personally equated all those with reasonable, like beyond any personal reasonable doubt, with aspects of the Bible. Of course, I don't know very much about the Bible personally. I don't study it enough, but
well, there's your first mistake.
yeah, I know. But I try to equate it a little more that way. And the reason why, one of the main reasons why I don't read the Bible as much is because I see that the English ones usually tend to be a lot more fallible. They don't have the same context as necessarily like the original Greek or Hebrew that's written in. And there's a lot of connotations that are completely missed. Like, for example, like the 40 days and 40 nights in Hebrew just meant it's a really long time, while we see it as a literal 40 days and a literal 40 nights sometimes when it's written in English. So that's kind of why I'm a little more hesitant with that. But the main topic I wanted to get on.
Hang on for a second, John, because
Yeah, dude, you're not making any fucking
if
sense.
there was a God.
So you don't read the Bible, but you're a physics major, and you're saying that you can equate science and God, but you don't have a clear understanding of the Bible because you don't read it. And the reason you don't read it is because you are aware that the English translations pale in comparison to some of the older original texts, whether it be in Aramaic, Hebrew, Latin, or Greek. And so those would have a more definitive conceptual connotation in the writings, and probably would be more compelling than the versions Christians read today. And so therefore you don't want to read the Bible because it has shortcomings, and you don't know about the Bible very well because you don't read the Bible, but still you're going to say, I believe in it, and I know that I can equate science to God. Dude, you're not making any fucking sense. And that's why Matt, when he said, well, I don't really read the Bible, Matt was like, well, that's your first problem. How are you going to compare some things if you don't even have a fundamental understanding of the subjects or objects being compared? People are weird, you know. They'll do anything to hold on to that faith, yo. Anything. Even, you know, when they have a scientific educational background, you're like, no, creation. I'm still gonna rock out with this creation thing, even though I don't read the Bible because it's flawed and it's not completely intact in any versions we can obtain. But I'm still gonna kind of believe it anyway, even though I understand the laws of nature and reality. Hey, this is what we do. People are weird like that, you know? I mean, if you believe in the Bible, especially like wholeheartedly, you believe in the God of the Bible and all the workings and miracles and the Christ Son and all that stuff. If you believe that shit, fine and dandy. Just please study it. Like, at least study it and know that shit forwards and back. and then I don't really see an issue with it. But if you're gonna believe it and you really don't know the material, that's kind of fucked up. You know, that's the fucked up part. I don't know what it says. I don't know what it says per se, but you know, I went to church, and you know, my parents told me stuff about the Bible, and I've heard preachers preach the Bible before. I just know the parts they told me. It seems pretty legit, so I'm gonna just roll with it. Alright guys, let me take a piss real quick.
You identify as a Christian, I'm assuming. If I heard
Yes, I do.
If I heard you correctly. Okay. And so you haven't spent a lot of time focused on the Bible because you have concerns about, you know, translation and meaning and all this other stuff. Wouldn't it be God's responsibility to make sure that there's a clear understanding of his wishes, and you know, either the Bible's completely irrelevant, which I don't know how you get to Christianity if you throw the whole Bible out. So there must be something relevant about the Bible if Christianity were true, and then wouldn't Yahweh, wouldn't Jesus have an obligation to make sure that you clearly understood the message?
So that's a very good point. I have a perfect answer to that. My personal perspective is that it would generally be encouraged that everyone's given a choice, and if the translators that are supposed to translate it don't make the right choice with it, or if they don't necessarily give it the right feedback, it's not going to turn out right.
Well, isn't it God's responsibility to preserve the record? I mean, if you're going to communicate with your creation, and you've decided that the best way to do this, and I would argue that this is a particularly stupid method, is to reveal information to individuals in languages that you know will mutate and die out, and then you don't even take steps to make sure that the people who are transcribing it and interpreting it and that they get it right. How is this remotely a good plan for a God to communicate a message to people?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, that's a good point. I know. That's why I brought it up.
I honestly, I don't know really of a good answer for that.
Exactly.
I don't either. I do know a good answer. I know that based on that, I have no good reason to believe that there is an intelligent, wise God who tried to communicate through a Bible. There may be a God, and he may be intelligent, he may be wise, but no intelligent, wise being knowing what was going to happen would communicate in this way. I mean, not even if you're going to do this, you'd end up with a Bible 2.0 and 3.0 and, you know, direct translations, something like that. And so if that's the case, and there is a God, he's not using this plan to communicate. And he doesn't appear to be using any plan to communicate. He seems to be like the universe's hide-and-go-seek champion, you know, for many years running. And that leaves people, what reason would there be to believe in Christianity if you don't have any reasonable expectation that the information you have about Christianity is reliable?
That's actually a really good point.
Yeah, it is a really good point. I never asked my parents these questions.
John, I'm not trying to, you know, beat you up. I'm just pointing out the things that I had to think about when I was a Southern Baptist.
I appreciate this.
It's one of those things where I think the most difficult part isn't realizing that we don't have good answers to those questions. The most difficult part is realizing that if we don't, in fact, have good answers to those questions, we cannot have a reasonable warrant to believe the religion that is founded upon those problems that we've exposed. Now, you talked earlier about, you know, looking at scientific models, and there was something you said that gave me the impression you were finding a way to make God fit in with the scientific models. Is that did you imply that at all?
Yeah, so my perspective is the main thing that I've ever really read with the Bible, aside from some of the gospel is
You said you never read the Bible.
Specifically focused on like Genesis chapters 1 through I think 3, and by kind of going through it verse by verse, I found how it kind of fits in with the Big Bang Theory, going into planetary stellar evolution, and going into like
Motherfucker, please. You couldn't figure that shit out from reading Genesis.
A lot of people don't see it that way. I don't
Exactly.
think
I
I
don't.
look at it in the right perspective.
So first of all, how do we know what the right perspective is? Because one of the things, if we're going to look, let me do this the easy way. I don't know what the justification is for trying to find a way to make the biblical account match up with the science account. Based on what we just talked about having no good reason to think that it's a reliable, accurate, portrayal of events. So what justification will we have for trying to make it fit? But if the goal is to try and make it fit, I would argue that you're not at all doing anything related to science or reason, because that is specifically engaging in interpretation to make what you believe fit the evidence, rather than letting the evidence lead to what you should believe.
No, I feel the evidence does lead to that. What I do is I initially look at, like, for example, the creation, and I run through how they correlate. I think that every time that we do make a scientific discovery, my perspective is science proves God. So if we find further scientific studies, we will find more and more things that correlate with the general message that we receive. Now, I looked at a few creation myths. I looked at, I think, the Buddhist creation myth, and it was laughably dissimilar to, like, Big Bang Theory and such. But you look at like Genesis, and you see that the creation myth holds some water. It's not going to be perfect. It's just how it works, because it was written for a non-scientific community thousands of years ago, and passed down multiple generations by word of mouth before language was even written. It's not going to be perfect, but I see strong, or at least moderate, correlation with the major leading scientific theories.
So let me ask you this. I would argue that if the God who created the universe inspired a record of that it would actually be accurate. That it would be
let me do this.
That it would be trivial and important to at least get the order right.
I agree.
And yet Genesis doesn't get the order right, which means that the Genesis isn't what God has. Certainly the order of events don't match the actual events, which means if there is a creator, he's not responsible for what Genesis says, so we can throw Genesis out.
Let me ask you, where exactly do you see it, like, not matching up?
Exactly do I see it? So the order of events in Genesis is a beginning, and then an earth with darkness enshrouded by heavy gases and water. By the way, I'm pulling this from the Talk Origins archive.
So let me tell you the interpretation that I got from that. So
I wasn't anywhere near done.
All right.
So a beginning, a primitive earth and darkness, then light, then an expansive atmosphere, then large areas of dry land, land plants, then the sun, the moon, and the stars, and then sea monsters and flying creatures, and then wild and tame beasts and mammals, and then man. But the real order is a beginning, and then light, and then the sun and the stars, and then the primitive earth and the moon and the atmosphere, and then dry land, and then sea creatures, and then some land plants. The order doesn't match up.
But if you look at it from the perspective of being on Earth, there is some reasonability with that, because initially the Earth's atmosphere was opaque. Therefore,
Yeah,
seeing the perspective of the universe from Earth.
I have late starts on Wednesday morning, so I have to go to work.
No, they would
not
see the
for a
Earth if
little
they were
while.
on the Earth.
Sorry, you're right.
Yeah.
I can see the moon and the stars. My bad.
Sure, but are you saying that there was somebody there to record this? Because first of all, what you may think about the atmosphere certainly doesn't apply with a thinking agent on Earth to record this. And wouldn't God then know that we would discover the order in which these things occurred and find this glaring error in the account that is supposed to be his?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, here's one other question, John, just to mull over. Is there a way, knowing what we know about what science has discovered about the facts of the origin of the universe, if you wanted to dig through a religious text from some other religion and find a way to make it fit to the facts of the universe, don't you think you could do that too?
I think it would give it viability, yes.
Well, no, I'm not talking about whether or not it's viable. I'm saying you've done this with Genesis. Hindus are far closer to the age of the universe, mathematically 13, 14 billion years. They're at least in the billion-year ballpark of this. If you talk to Muslims, they will go through the Quran with a fine-tooth comb, pointing out how it's apparently explained everything in science. Here's the problem. It doesn't actually explain these things. We learn about them, and then people go back in and read that into the passage, that a fetus looks like chewed gum, that sort of thing.
That's fair.
So the question is, if we don't have any good reason to believe we have a good record of what God wants or thinks, or whether he exists, and we don't find the Bible particularly reliable, then there would seem to be no reason to try to make the Bible fit scientific facts, because what we know about science, the Bible says bats are birds, but we don't classify them that way. And you could say, to a primitive person, it was a flying thing, and that's as good. And I would agree that a primitive person would look at a bat and put it in the same category as birds, but it's not. And the author, if it were a God that knew the future, would know that we would discover that, and there'd be this problem. Now, I'm not raising the bats, birds verse as, this is a big takedown for, Yahweh. The thing is, it also gets a lot of other things wrong with regard to human interactions and morality. And, I talk about slavery pretty much every week on the show for the history of the show, it seems. But why? What is the motivation to try to make a particular religion that you like, that you've acknowledged you have difficulty justifying, fit in with scientific findings? Because the fact that you may be able to find a correlation between them doesn't tell you anything at all about whether it's true, because here's what happens. There are a whole bunch of different creation myths, and human beings trying to answer the same questions. We are generally similar. This is why our myths are similar. This is why our superheroes are similar. This is why whenever we have something that's unknown, there's a limited pool. Where does lightning come from? Oh, it comes from Thor. It comes from Zeus. It comes from the gods. It comes from this. Because we couldn't really say, lightning comes from that amoeba or that snail on the ground. Nobody would ever think that. So we limit that. So by trying to answer questions with limited information, coming from limited minds, it's hardly surprising to me. As a matter of fact, I'm surprised that creation origin stories aren't actually more accurate. And every time they try to be specific, they tend to get it wrong. It's in the general things. Mm-hmm. There's a way, poetically, metaphorically, to make the ancient Egyptian stories true, with the sun god carrying the sun across the sky. Well, we know that's not what actually happens, but from the perspective of that person, that was their best understanding of it, and you know what? It was pretty accurate.
Looking pretty good.
Okay, I'll give you that. Okay, so let me turn this around from you real quick. So,
okay.
If I were to tell you back in, 4000 BCE, before there was, so like in Israel, if I was to tell you, so 3.4 billion years ago, by the way, a billion that's a 1 with 9 zeros following. By the way, a 0 is a concept you guys haven't come up with yet. You're going to lose the whole story. The beginning of Genesis is not meant to be the focus of the story. It's meant to be kind of a background of what's happening and what's going forward.
Well, yes, you can say that now. Prior to that, didn't people think that this was literal and accurate and accurately got the order of events right?
And are people not fallible?
Well, yeah, but you have a scenario where for thousands of years, or a long time, people thought the order of creation was one thing because that's what their holy book told them, and it was wrong. And how did we correct that? Did we get a new revelation from God, or did we go out and find the information ourselves?
We went out and found it ourselves. Now, I agree with you on this, because when I follow religion, I don't think that should promote intellectual laziness. I actually condemn a lot of Christians for that perspective because they say, oh, well, why is the sky blue? Well, God made it that way. No, yes, that's the case, but it's not just that. It's the Rayleigh scattering effect. That's the way that the atmosphere works.
Mhm.
And so if you stop shy, only not pursuing true wisdom, you're not really pursuing what God made for you.
Well, I would agree that you're not pursuing true wisdom. I just don't agree why you call it what God made for us, because I don't see any reason to think that God made anything for us. And if I were God,
Lou,
which
what'd
is
it do?
the title of the book I'm working on, which is why it's kind of easy for me to dig on these topics, I could have created a universe and individuals, and I could have.
All right, so with this underpainting being done, I want to take this off the canvas, off the easel, and try to finish up another piece, which is basically done. Have I done a new piece this year? I don't think I've even finished a piece this year yet. Still January though. But I do want to take a picture of the progress of this piece so far. Alright, doesn't look too bad. Yeah, I'll check out your YouTube channel later on, bro.
Communicated with them in a way where they understood it and understood it correctly and accurately.
Yes, you could have. Now, the question I have for you then is, does that allow for a free will and a choice in faith?
Okay, do you believe in Satan?
Damn.
Okay, so under the normative model, Satan, devil, Lucifer, whatever, he has been in God's presence, absolutely knows that God is powerful, knows the accurate order of creation, and yet still chose to rebel, demonstrating that there's no conflict between God revealing himself to someone and them exercising their free will.
That's fair. But at the same time, giving a definitive showing that God is there also can allow for a, well, why is it? I don't know, I'll ask God. Instead of going and finding it out for yourself.
Well, that's
it
but,
kind of speaks to the point of curiosity.
so this seems to be kind of a lazy retreat from that. I know my parents exist and I know they have rules. I can still disobey them. I know that there are people out there who have the answers. I could skip to the end of the book, but I don't. I could, when I'm working on the Sudoku on the airplane, I could flip over a couple pages and get the numbers that I'm just not really. I'm tired of this, I'm bored with it. I can do it, and the fact that something exists doesn't mean anything about what you have to do about it. For example, a God could reveal himself to me right now, and I would definitely believe that God existed, but that doesn't mean that I would worship or admire or respect.
That's true.
So now we've dispensed with the free will excuse for why God won't reveal himself. Why then isn't there a Damascus Road experience for everybody? Why is he playing favorites?
Sorry, I couldn't hear you right there. Can you say that again?
So we've dispensed with the idea that free will is a roadblock to God revealing himself. And if that's the case, then why isn't everybody deserving of a Damascus Road experience? Why is God playing favorites and selectively doing it? Also, wouldn't a God understand that selectively picking people out sets up a problem of epistemic warrant for everybody else?
So, from the way I see it, is one of the most important things about increasing your faith. Experiencing trials, tribulations.
Why would you want to increase faith?
Why wouldn't you?
Faith is not a reliable pathway to knowledge or understanding. I see no use for faith. Why would God want you to have faith?
Sometimes when you go through discouraging times, okay, so I'm gonna relate this to gambling for a second, which may not be the best idea for me to do. But when you gamble, you occasionally get limited feedback, you get limited rewards. Once every 3 times the first time you get a reward, once every 17 times after that, and then it varies. You never know when. Because of that, in psychology, it becomes extremely addictive and it is extremely difficult to quit. With that said,
For some people.
You have it's much more difficult to quit than other aspects, other types of.
I'm just trying to figure out what this has to do with faith, because as somebody who gambles, I don't not exercising faith.
So my point is then. Same kind of idea of a limited reward system of it only occasionally happens. People have a tendency to stick with faith more, which means they hold out away from despair more often.
No, you're not talking about faith. You're talking about hope and whether or not there's a benefit to hope.
Oh, that's a fair point.
If my hope is proportional to the evidence and it's based on reason, wouldn't that be better? I mean, if John is spending his life with a positive hope that he's going to be the next president of the United States, or president eventually. And actually, like the odds of that are 1 in a million, but he thinks the odds are closer to 1 in 100. Doesn't he actually have a hope that is potentially damaging?
Though, a lot of the people that you see in history are those that were too stubborn to quit. Those that are the famous names.
The people who are too stubborn to quit are the people who are mired in religion and try to use faith as the justification for it. That would almost be definitionally too stubborn to quit. They're refusing to.
They're also the names that are known most often in history.
Well,
in general.
So is Hitler. My gosh, did I just lose everything because I mentioned Hitler? I'm not concerned about who's most mentioned in history. I'm concerned about whether or not people have a good reason to believe things. And basically at this point you're now seemingly arguing that there's a good reason to believe in God based on faith because it makes some people's lives better and might get them mentioned more in history?
What I'm saying is that those that pursue unrelentingly are those that more often succeed, because those that are wise and then say, oh, my chances are actually extremely low comparatively of those that don't try and as such don't succeed.
I don't know what this has to do with God and faith.
We get sidetracked.
Well, couldn't God unambiguously reveal himself to you and still give you kind of those random rewards model that you compared gambling with, that if you don't know when your reward's going to be, you're going to have more faith, I think is what you're getting at. And couldn't God still reveal himself to you, but not reward you consistently?
Hey, I'm God, and I'm going to be watching you, and here's clear confirming, evidence that I exist. But you're not going to necessarily know when I am or am not going to interact in your life, but you definitely know that I'm here.
Right.
However, I personally don't think that that would make me as motivated to go through the trials and tribulations of my everyday life. I would constantly be going more, God, get me out of this. God, get me out of this. God, get me out of this. I'm lazy here. And it would develop a mindset of being coddled constantly.
Okay. Don't people do that anyway?
Yeah,
Whether God has revealed himself to them or not, don't they do exactly that? Aren't there people who spend the vast majority of their lives convinced that a God can get them out of stuff?
or at least pray for what they want, the way they want things to be.
Oh, Lord, help me get through this test. Lord, don't let my car get repossessed. Lord, please let my mom not die. People don't do that all the time?
I mean, they do, but they
Okay.
still go after ways to find it for themselves.
If they do it all the time, then wouldn't it be better for them to have a direct, clear revelation of God and have God say, I'm not going to be answering your every whim. I want you to know I exist and I want you to know what I expect of you. But, if you're in a tight spot, don't just go reaching out to me. You're going to have to do a lot of this yourself.
But that's what a parent would do.
I mean, why is it that it's so easy for me, as a fallible human being, to be a better God than God?
Because, okay, so
Because what?
we're also looking at this from a finite perspective.
What happened then?
Okay, so supposing God exists,
Okay?
he has infinite wisdom and infinite perspective.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So, well, okay, so I guess I'm going for the cop-out right now of
Mysterious ways.
Humans, how can we possibly know?
Yeah.
What our perspective is, but
And I'm glad you went this way, because this is actually one of the chapters in the book, is this idea of, we're limited beings, so we don't have the perspective of God, so we can't assess what God could or couldn't do or should or shouldn't do, because we can't know as much as he does, and he has good reasons for not doing the things that we think he should do.
Mhm.
Yeah.
no,
You know what that is? That's garbage. That is a garbage excuse, because it could also be the case that God doesn't have good reasons. That, matter of fact, we are correct, or that God doesn't exist. Yeah. So
I agree with you. I understand that your perspective, you have a much better perspective on this. I agree with you on that.
my thing is, John, and I, there's a whole bunch of other people waiting. I don't mean to just cut the call off, and I will let you get to this point. But if we agree that even that potential explanation does not get us to any sort of warrant, it's along the lines of, well, that's exactly what an innocent person would say. That sort of inquisition, it seems similar to me. Of course, you would say that, or a guilty person would say that they're innocent to avoid conviction. And a God has a good enough reason to not do the things we expect. But there's a bigger problem here, and that is, if there's a God, if you were a God, and you had good reasons to not interact with humans the way they would expect, don't you think you could find a way to communicate this in a way that doesn't violate or expand this problem? And if it is in fact impossible, aren't you ultimately responsible for that problem, as you created the system and the limited beings, and now you're putting a completely unrealistic, unreasonable expectation on them to be able to figure out and accept things for which you yourself know are impossible and beyond evidential warrant?
I have to say about this is that part of why I went after physics and why I'm pursuing science is because, from my perspective and the way that I see it being a Christian, I know since God is infinite, the world that he has created, the universe he's created, has infinite amount of knowledge for us to pursue. So I know for a fact that my field will never really end. We'll never find some solid theory of everything. If we do, that will probably be evidence that God doesn't exist, if I'm being perfectly honest. And string theory doesn't count because it's unfalsifiable. We have no way of possibly proving it. So it becomes a philosophical debate at that point. But in any case, because I know that my pursuit of curiosity will never end, that's one of the things that I'm most thankful to God for. And the worst part about being a Christian is I know that based on my understanding of God, no matter what we say, we'll not be able to prove anything because God, if he exists, is unfalsifiable because of how he works. If he does exist, there will be some evidence down the line that he truly doesn't, which I hate that. Because the only form of evidence that we have that for ourselves is anecdotal. We have no possible way to prove God's true existence. We have correlations, we have small things that say, okay, maybe this is actually the case. But we can't prove it. So the best thing we can do is just hope that no one, or not really necessarily hope, but expect that no one is going to have a definitive, nope, you're wrong.
And I would say the best thing you could do is to not believe something until there's sufficient reason to believe it, and not just sit there saying, I believe this, or as you said, you know that God is this, and you know God's characteristics, and you know that God is falsifiable and limitations, and I hope that nobody ever proves God wrong. All you're doing is talking about how much you want this to be the case, not how much warrant there is to accept that it's the case. And that's not the way science is done. It's not the way physics is done. It may be the way string theory is done, but that's a conversation for another day. And my friend Lawrence Cross may object to that. Maybe I'll talk to him about that the next time we do an event.
So, I understand where you're coming from. That's a very good point.
I know you believe, and I know it's frustrating that you believe while acknowledging that you can't find a good reason to believe, that you've accepted an unfalsifiable proposition. And while you may, in fact, be viewing this in a science-ish way, I don't see how this is good skepticism or good science, because the time to believe something is after there's warrant. The time to point to another scientific model that has this characteristic of unfalsifiable, which we think we should go ahead and just accept. That's the foundation of what Popper was teaching us.
That's a good point.
But on that note, I want to get on some other callers real quick. But please email, call back in some other time. I appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for talking with me.
Thanks, John. Okay.
PC's making a lot of funny noises.
Yeah, I think that's the machine in the other room that we're hearing in our ears.
Okay.
But it could be. Well, no, it happened after the call was off. But stuff like that happens in a live show. There it is again.
Here it is.
I worry for getting pop-up notifications and spammed with ads, and if the whole thing's going to explode and the show's going to end before we get to... Oh, no. I went ahead and kind of ended that because John, and I had talked for a long time, and I wanted to get some more thoughts in from you. Hopefully that's not mine.
Nope, I think it is you.
I don't know how we come through the headphones. Oh! Look, go ahead and talk, John.
Oh, okay. Matt is muting his PC now. I don't know if that's going out on the air, but anyway. Live show.
Yeah.
He started to make a point.
So I have earbuds in so that I can clearly hear the caller and us, and that means that I don't hear that the sound's actually coming from this machine right in front of my microphone. Which is proof that I'm not going to get everything right. I like that call, and one of the things is, we talked about this before, about this idea of referring to people who believe as if they are intellectually inferior. I've talked about how my IQ didn't go up when I stopped believing. I just got a better access to better information and a better perspective on it. And the thing I find most interesting about that call is that John hadn't thought through some of the things. Oh, that's a good point. That's a good point. And certainly didn't change his mind over the course of the call. But I'm confident that John will at least think about those things. Because for somebody who cares about truth and cares about science, I think the most troubling thing for me was you just You just believe and you hope that nobody comes along and proves you wrong. I know that we do that sort of thing. We all do that sort of thing about something. But I don't think that we should do that sort of thing. And I think if we were exposed to the fact that this is what we're doing, here's an example of me doing it. I've had problems with my eyes for a while. Occasionally they get blurry, get better, get fixed. I need to go see an ophthalmologist. I know this. I know this from the science. I know this from my various health conditions.
All right, what time is it?
I have not.
I gotta get ready
Something
for work
else
shortly.
slightly more important than whether or not I could see clearly. Has come up.
For me to kind of wrap
at
this
every
thing up for
opportunity.
the day.
And
well,
so
for
I'm
this
sitting
morning,
here
guys.
hoping that the situation doesn't get
And
worse,
tonight,
despite the evidence
today is my long day at
it
work,
is
so I
getting
probably
worse.
won't stream after
And
work.
I'm hoping
I don't
it
get
doesn't
off until
too
late.
bad before I actually go see the doctor.
But
I'm being stupid.
it's already
I am-
hump day, so let's get
I
ready
am
for the weekend.
doing the very thing that I would have criticized John for doing with regard to a God.
I
The
honestly
difference
think
is that
I might just
when
leave this
it's
pencil
pointed
on
out
here.
to me,
I was gonna draw these
I
pencil
happily
lines
acknowledge,
and then go back over it with white paint and just sticking it up a little bit,
And it
so that the
motivates
whole
me to
canvas is
stop.
painted. But I
Which is why
actually like the
having
pencil
a
lines on here now, so I think I might just do
People are really
like
good
a
at
mixed medium,
rationalizing.
mixed
Everybody
medium
is.
type piece
And-
where
and
it's
you
oil
mentioned it in the call,
and pencil.
You take what
Oil
you already
and color
believe
pencil.
and then you try to
I can live with that.
retrofit it into.
They're thin,
This thing
but
that you wanna
if I
believe.
go over them and darken them
And
up a little
retrofit it
bit,
into
they
the
are
Bible.
very noticeable.
And,
You can see the lines.
backwards thing.
And I
see that all
wanted,
the
I
time.
actually
People
wanted to be where
latch
it makes
onto
you walk
something
up close
and
on it.
so then they
Like
go
from
looking
across the
for evidence
room,
to
you
support
probably
what they
can't
already
see the
believe.
little white lines on
You do
here.
it in all avenues
But as soon as
of
you
life,
get
and
close, it's like,
something
oh
that
shit,
the
there's
conscious
more
can
lines on
Be
it.
aware of and try not to do because it's a really natural thing to do to reinforce your own beliefs that already exist. So there's nothing, that isn't perfectly normal. It's just kind of your awareness of it and your application of skepticism and reason and scientific method that kind of gets you out of that trap.
there's a number of things that I'd love to get a chance to talk to John about. Maybe he'll call back in on another week when I'm on. One of them is when you have this sort of model, how much does your God belief affect your other decisions? I mean, certainly we know people who are in specific versions of Christianity where what they believe about abortion or climate change or whatever that they've derived from their religion is going to affect who they're going to vote for, what policies they're going to. I don't know how much that affects what John thinks and how he votes. When if you haven't bothered to spend much time looking at the Bible and you really don't expect it to be accurate, maybe you're not against same-sex marriage. Maybe this is where the moderate to liberal theists come from. But my problem is that yes, it's true that fundamentalists can become liberal and moderate believers. They get away on occasion. They throw away the
so
things that are clearly
I
problematic.
feel comfortable
They
with
just
this piece
hang on to
like this.
abstract notion of God.
I think I might
also see
photograph it
the
real
way.
quick and post it on
When
Instagram.
somebody becomes convinced of this abstract notion of God, instead of having a conversation with me now, let John have a conversation with me 25 years ago. My conversation with John went a little differently. You believe that the Bible is God's instruction book for your life, that you believe that there is a God. You're not expecting everything to be perfect, but why is it you haven't bothered to study it? What is it you're afraid of? This is God's book that he wants you to give. Shouldn't you have good explanations for why you have problems with it? Because maybe the problem is you, not with God. Maybe the problem is not with the transcription or the interpretation. Maybe the problem is you. Maybe there's something in your life, something in your heart. I can't keep doing this because it's vile. But if that kind of conversation happened, that's how you move someone who is a liberal, kind of Christian towards fundamentalism. Because if the book says, if a man lies with another man as he lies with a woman, my friend Keith Lowell Jensen would say that's advice about positions. You should just lift up a little bit more. But if the book says that, and the general view is that this is, a declaration that homosexuality is an abomination and they are deserving of death, boy, that's kind of important. I'm an atheist in part because I took seriously what I thought my obligation was as a Christian, which was to have good reasons for my beliefs. I want to try and get to one, maybe two more callers.
First of all, Richard, can you explain what they are?
Yes. A few years ago, I filmed. Somebody filmed me reading the hate mail that I get. I think I was probably dressed in a dressing gown and with my feet in slippers before a log fire. I don't think I was smoking a pipe in that. I know I wasn't. But you get. I think I had a cat on my lap. It was that sort of thing. And reading out these extraordinarily obscene, vitriolic. I hope you get painful cancer and die a painful death. I hope you get run over by a church van. And then, by popular request, I did another lot. About 3 years later. My original plan for that was suggested to me by a young woman who was a student of making films, and she had a plan to film me doing it, this time not by a fire, but this time with a beautiful young woman cellist, playing beautiful sweet music, while I read these awful hate mail. That unfortunately that never got edited, and so the second one was in fact done in front of a fish tank with the fish swimming peacefully around. There's been another one that I received quite recently, which didn't get into either of those two performances, which I really rather like. It's, I hope you lose your watch and are late for an important appointment.
Are you going to publish a book of them all?
Actually, that's not a bad idea.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Right, another question from somewhere over here. There's a lady right at the back there. I'm going to make you run, Martin. Right up to the back. The lady in the orange top. It looks orange from here. Apologies if it's not.
So maybe a question of science fiction or evolutionary biology, I'm not sure, but do you ever speculate about what adaptation might come next for humans and what that might look like? Or would you not enter into that?
Well, if we're talking about biological evolution in the future of humans, remember that
Alright guys, thanks for chilling with me this morning. We got a good bit done, so we finished up the underpainting for upcoming project that's going to be in addition to the reader series. Actually just put the last little finishing touches on the last self-portrait I did, which was just a few lines I wanted to add on there. And now we have this piece that's going to be up next. So this underpainting is done, and when I get back on here, we're going to start applying the second layer of paint and start defining some colors better, getting some more details in there. And it's a smaller canvas, so it should go pretty quick. I have a couple of these that I want to do, and I still need to work on one more piece that will fit into this series, and we'll see what that is. I'm not really sure how I'm going to work that yet, but hope you guys have a positive and productive day. Peace. See y'all next time.